Welcome to our lesson on the structural hierarchy of living things. As you probably know, there's an enormous variety of living organisms on the planet. We separate them or organize them into different kingdoms. Animalia is the one that we belong to. Regardless of what kingdom they're in, all organisms, all biological organisms, can be placed in, and what they're made of can be placed in a structural hierarchy, so that we can better understand how all living organisms work. Let me explain what I mean here. So, if we want to understand humans, which is the purpose of this class, here's our organism. That's not what we look like, obviously. To understand humans, we have to understand the organ systems that they're made of. To understand each system, we have to understand the organs inside it. To understand those organs, we have to know what tissues they're made of. To understand tissues and their functions, we have to understand cells, and so on. And we can get progressively smaller. The hierarchy actually becomes bigger too, which we'll discuss in a little bit. So let's start with the very basic, atoms. Atoms are made of atomic particles. Atomic particles are protons, neutrons, and electrons. And when we combine them in different ways, we form atoms, unique atoms. So this is a carbon atom. If we put together just a proton and electron, we have a hydrogen atom. And if we add a whole bunch of all of these, then maybe we make potassium. Now, these atoms have the ability to form bonds, so they connect together. For instance, this hydrogen atom connects with another hydrogen atom, and we form a hydrogen molecule, which is the gas that's in the atmosphere. Here we have a carbon atom, and if you combine a carbon atom with a couple of oxygen atoms, you've made CO2, or carbon dioxide, also in the atmosphere. There are tons of molecules. But the ones that we're most interested in biology are the ones that are called macromolecules. Macromolecules are not single molecules. They are actually very large chains or large complicated structures made up of individual molecules that are building blocks. For instance, nucleotide building blocks make macromolecules like DNA and RNA. Amino acid building blocks make macromolecules like proteins. Simple sugars make macromolecules like complex carbohydrates, and fatty acids make macromolecules called lipids. Now, these four macromolecules, and these are the only four that we're talking about because they're the only biological macromolecules, combine in different ways to help us make cells and all of the structures inside them. Now, cells are the most basic unit of life, which means that a cell on its own can perform all the functions that we ascribe to living organisms. We're going to talk about those characteristics in the next lesson. But cells on their own are alive, and some of them are on their own organisms. They don't have organ systems and organs and tissues. They are single cells. We're not concerned with those in this course, but I just wanted you to know that it does stop there for some species. However, in multicellular organisms, our cells multiply and become specialized, which we call differentiation. So when sperm and egg first fuse together, they form a generic cell called the zygote, and that cell multiplies and forms lots of copies of itself. Some of those copies become specialized to become red blood cells. Some become neurons, connective tissue, muscle, epithelial tissue, fat. Each one of these specialized cells can be part of a collection of differentiated cells, which we call a tissue. And there are four tissues that make up the human body: connective tissue, which connects things; epithelial tissue, which covers things; nervous tissue, which stimulates and controls things; and muscle tissue, which moves things. And we're going to talk about each one of these later. Now, if we take several different kinds of tissues, usually all four, and put them together, then we create an organ. This organ happens to be your skin, and it consists of epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and even muscle, there it is, there's the muscle. So it takes lots of tissues to make up an organ. Now, when you have a group of organs that together carry out a generalized set of functions like digestion or circulation, that's called an organ system. Multicellular organisms have multiple organ systems, and we're going to go through each one of them in the course of this course. Now, in this class, of course, we're focusing on humans, but it's important to understand how we fit into biological structure on a larger scale. So now we're going to go beyond the organism for a moment. When we have a group of organisms that are all the same species and they're in the same geographical area, we call this a population. So we might have a population of humans in the desert of North America. When in the same geographical area you are considering multiple populations of different species, this is called a community. So the Arctic community would consist of polar bears and seals and fish, and I really don't even know what else. Communities, when they interact with non-living things in the area, is what we call an ecosystem. So for our polar bear and friends, that would include the icebergs, that would include the air, that would include the water. All of that is part of that ecosystem. When we put all of the ecosystems together on the entire planet, this we call the biosphere. Now, one thing to understand about the hierarchy is that the higher we go on the hierarchy, the more complex something is, the more parts it has that we have to understand. So particles are very simple, right? There are 3 of them and they have just a few properties. As we move up, each one of these becomes increasingly complex. Now, some of you are going to be like, what? I don't understand chemistry. That seems pretty complex to me. Challenging or complicated or difficult to understand is not the same thing as complex. Complex really means lots of different parts to understand. Another corollary of this is that the lower you are on the hierarchical structure, the more abundant the item is. So because well, let's just start here. There's one biosphere. In that biosphere, there are many ecosystems. In each ecosystem, there are multiple communities. In each community, there are multiple populations made up of multiple organisms, each with multiple organ systems, each with multiple organs, and so on. Which means that if you keep working down, this becomes more abundant. There are more particles in the universe or on this earth than there are any other thing on this hierarchical level. Now, it follows, since each level is connected to or made up of the one beneath it, that a change that to any one of those hierarchical levels can affect the other layers of the hierarchy above or below it. So, for instance, changes in a cell, like becoming cancerous, can affect the functioning of the organ, which can affect the organ system and even the organism. Changes in the ecosystem can affect the populations and the organisms that are living inside it. Changes in a population can affect the community and the ecosystem to which it belongs. So we are all connected. The things that we do as humans, say to the planet and the climate, those are things that are affecting a hierarchical level above us. Okay. That's it for the structural hierarchy of living things.